trying to do something beyond, just making money, that you're trying to make a difference and help the people in your community, because that's one of the things that the Black Studies movement sort of pushed, that we were supposed to get the skills, the training, the information, and come back and share what we learned with our community.
You are now part of a social experiment.
See now where my limit is. Only got no ohs.
Thank you for joining us today on the journey towards self-mastery. Our next guest is one of the leading experts in Black history education in the country. He has been studying and teaching Black history for over 50 years. He served as the chair of the Department of History and interim director of the Center for African American Studies at the University of Texas at Arlington. He was part of the first initiative to get Black history taught in Dallas schools. Currently, he is the deputy director and chief operations officer of the African American Museum in Dallas. He's also the national president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, an organization started by Carter G. Woodson himself. He's dedicated his life to teaching, writing, and promoting Black history. Let's welcome today the legend, Dr. Marvin Dulaney, to the program.
Glad to be here, man. I appreciate the invitation.
Yes, sir. Pleasure is mine. Definitely have been waiting to make this happen for a while, so I appreciate your time, man. So just to kick things off with, I was watching a Morgan Freeman interview. I don't know if you're familiar with Morgan Freeman. And there was a clip where he was asked about, the concept of Black History Month. And he mentioned that, the concept is ridiculous. Black history is American history. What are we wasting our time for celebrating Black History Month? It's foolishness. So what are your thoughts just about that concept right there? And then
Well, thank you allowed me to respond, because, I heard, I guess several years ago, that Morgan Freeman had made these comments about condemning Black History Month, that it was an anachronism, that Black history is American history. Again, and I say this halfway tongue in cheek, he doesn't know his history, because if he knew his history, which of course is our history, he would know that for most of the history of this nation, they've excluded African American history from, let's say, the mainstream of American history. They've excluded African American history from being taught in American history classes. So, my own experience, and of course, obviously, he has had the same experience. I went through 12 years of education, and from grade school to middle school to high school. I did not learn about one single African or African American man or woman who had ever done anything in history. So what kind of nonsense is that you have all these people, all of us here, given our participation and our contributions to this country, yet it wasn't taught, so I just happened to get lucky in that I came along in the late 60s when they indeed were starting, in fact, I guess we could call it the Black Studies movement, when African-American students and some white students were shutting down campuses all across the country, demanding more Black professors at the college level, demanding the teaching of Black history. So part of why I do what I do today, and part of why I've done what I've done for over 50 years, is because I saw that need in the late 60s and early 70s. So I basically went to college in order to become a history teacher, a history teacher teaching Black history, as a matter of fact, so that someone like me, and of course, obviously at that time, a lot of others, felt the drive and the passion to teach our history to our young people, to teach our history to our people. And so, I spent all this time then, college, graduate school, in order to learn our histories so that I could go out and teach it. And so for him to say that this about Black history, he doesn't know the history. He doesn't know what we call historiography, that Woodson started the association back in 1915 because there was this dearth, this neglect this denial of the African American experience in this country. And it took, as we know, 50 years literally for it to sort of catch on. It doesn't, the teaching and promotion and studying of Black history doesn't sort of become a boom in American education till the late 1960s. So as I said, I'm sorry, Morgan Freeman, you don't know your history.
Yes, sir. Now, I do want to slow down a little bit because you mentioned quite a lot of history in that short, short few sentences right there. But I think the thought is that we shouldn't have to teach Black history, and I agree with him from that perspective. But the reality is that, like you just mentioned, it is not being taught exactly. So, another controversial thing I think with history is as well is what exactly is history. I've heard from people it's like we weren't there. So how do we know this is factual things that occurred and these stories are accurate, and how much of it, you're talking about history, you're talking about time that really cannot be processed in regards to whose history are you talking about, who was involved, and history within itself is so much time. So how do you pinpoint these events and these occasions and the accuracy and all this? So you are a historian, you are a researcher. So just in terms of accuracy and information, because I've heard, you know, um, things that we deem to be true are not actually true sometimes, and people argue and debate it. They were not slave, there weren't slave ships and that brought Black people to this country. That's an improbability. There's no way that can happen. There's no historical evidence of that. Um, Harriet Tubman wasn't a part of the army, and she didn't do all these things, and there's no way that it could have happened, and that's not possible. These are folk tales. So when we look at history, what is the purpose of it, and then how do we pinpoint it as far as accuracy goes?
Sure, there's a methodology that we historians use in terms of verifying, the facts and details of history. We look at what we call the historical record. That is, what was written at the time, diaries, newspapers, journals, and basically even just in some cases, reports, and also photography. Photography starts about 1830s, 1840s. And so indeed we have these images that verify a lot of the history that specifically from about the mid 19th century on. Then we have oral reports and oral histories. Now, of course, some could say, well, that is indeed folklore. You definitely can't, verify all these stories that people be telling. And in a sense, they're right. But good historians, if we get an oral history account, then we look for other sources, written sources. History, believe it or not, is actually pretty much based on the written word. And so part of why we know about the ancient Egyptians is because of all the paintings and the temples in Egypt. You can actually go and you can read those hieroglyphs that tells you that history. Again, there's symbols in a different type of writing, but they tell us some great stories about ancient Egypt. We know the Bible. Now, the Bible indeed has some myths in it. Obviously, some of the miracles, you do have to take with a grain of salt. But the Bible, um, uh, traveler stories, all those things, and an irony is today we have much more ways to verify the history that has been taught in the past, as well as what we're sort of gathering and preserving today. I work in an African American museum, so one of the things that we do is we collect archival collections from persons who were involved in politics, the civil rights movement, and just people in general. We collect photographs. We collect phonograph records. We collect all of these different type of sources that serve as the verification of history. You mentioned Harriet Tubman and her participation in what was called the Combahee Raid in South Carolina in 1863. Well, a sister's just written a book um, on called Combi, in which she did all of this verification. She looked at the the pension records of some of the soldiers who were involved in that raid in 1863. She looked at the newspaper accounts. And of course, she did something really crazy, which is what historians don't typically do. She actually went down and reenacted some of the raid and went walking through the rice fields at night with his alligators and everything in order to see what was it like that night when the United States Army, the United States Colored Troops, by the way, made that raid on those plantations on the Combahee River in South Carolina. So, so this history is history. It's something that you can verify. You can indeed tell the truth about without making stuff up. And the irony is, let's say prior to the 20th century, a lot of stuff was made up. There's what we call and I know I'm too long-winded here, but there was all this romanticism in history, or let's say prior to the 20th century and prior to what we call the scientific analysis of history. That is, American historians in particular will write about how the founding fathers had this God-given mission to write the Constitution and to create this democracy and this city on the hill. Basically nonsense. But 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 that's how they wrote up until the 20th century, when we indeed started basing history on research, in documents, uh, photographs, letters, journals, diaries, where you indeed, and of course, newspapers.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I agree. And this is coming from a historian that is doing the work, and this is coming from somebody who studies and does the work on uncovering history. I think one thing that we can get factual today is Dr. Dulaney's history, right? Um, you are the firsthand account of that. So before we get into really the topic of Black history, I really want to get into your history. You are walking Black history. You lived through quite a bit of time in the United States of America, civil rights and all these things, right? So just walk us through the foundations, the beginnings of being a Black boy growing up in Ohio in 1950s. What was that environment like for you, and how'd you navigate through all that?
Okay. You're right. Indeed, my own personal biography consists of a lot of history in terms of what was happening in the country as I was coming of age, as they say. Now, I'm born in Alabama, part of the Great Migration. My parents moved from Alabama to Ohio in 1951. So my coming of age was going to school in integrated schools in Alliance, Ohio, this little small town in northeastern Ohio, and being like most Black males, just being caught up in sports, playing basketball, football, and baseball. Indeed, it took me a while to understand. Well, let's just say my experience was, I didn't, I had an issue with the coach on the basketball team during my senior year. So that ended that. And I always tell people that's probably one of the best things that happened to me, in that I stopped playing basketball and I started reading more, and specifically, learning about the African American experience. And so that sort of motivated me, as I said, to become a historian. I went to Central State University in Ohio, one of the best HBCUs in the country, in that, we were very political. Um, we were sort of just behind the civil rights movement. That is, most of the major campaigns, Birmingham, the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project, most of that sort of ended by the time I went to college and literally had the freedom and the opportunity to participate. But, we argued issues in politics. We argued Black nationalism against Marxist Leninism. We We tried to we dealt with the whole issue of Pan-Africanism. We indeed was one of the first generations to accept the fact that we were Black. You know, when I was in grade school and through high school, someone called you Black, you would fight. So here we get James Brown in 1968 singing, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud." And so we bought into all of that. And of course, we started getting the history because we had never had it before. So we started learning about Marcus Garvey, learning about W.E.B. Du Bois, learning about Carter G. Woodson and the things that they were promoting in terms of making us understand our history and our culture so that we would immerse ourselves in it and celebrate it rather than fighting it as some of the previous generations before us had done. I always talk about in my classes, specifically the African American history classes, I talk about the Harlem Renaissance, which was sort of spurred by what was called the New Negro movement, where the young African Americans of that period, Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, became immersed in Black culture and promoted it. Hughes writes this famous essay in The Nation in 1924 called the Negro Artist in the Racial Mountain, in which he talks about how a poet he met said to him that he didn't want to be a Negro poet. He just wanted to be a poet. And so Chris, so basically Hughes was contradicted him basically saying, you don't have any choice, that your experiences as a Black man in America made you a Negro poet, whether you wanted it to be one or not. And for you to try to decline and not be what you are, and was indeed sort of a rejection of your own history and your own culture. So we came to realize those things in the 1960s and to celebrate them. And, we got so crazy that you couldn't be Black enough in some sense. But again, it was great coming of age in the late 60s when we were to this self-actualization about our Blackness and our Africanness, so that we didn't have any problems with our self-images. We knew who we were. And that's very important, particularly for young Black men, to know who you are and not to be misled and have other people to define you.
Were you aware of like racial relations and what was going on in the country in your teen years as a kid growing up? Did you have personal experience?
Not so much in a personal experience, but seeing it on television. I saw the March on Washington on television. Of course, I saw the Selma to Montgomery march. I was aware of, let's say, the rebellions in Detroit and Newark and in all those places in 1967 and 1968. So again, all those did have an impression on me but I couldn't participate because I was too young, to go leave home and go and participate, for example, in the Mississippi Summer Freedom Project in 1964. But as I said, we got the tail end of it. We got, the decision to create the student organization for Black unity on our campus. We got we were able to shut down our campus one year and revamp the curriculum so that we would be learning more about ourselves and the things that we needed to do as young Black people to change our communities, to assist our communities and address the problems in our community.
Was that adult-led or student-led, the initiative?
Student-led. We shut it down and we forced the professors, many of whom were, and I'm going to use this term, bourgeois Negroes, who were still into respectability politics. Just we were trying to change the culture of, let's say, educated Black people, because educated Black people, would get upset if they saw Black people misusing the English language, behaving like those uneducated Negroes in the ghetto and all that. So we decided we're going to challenge all those conventions. Just one story to let you know what I'm talking about. We were good students, you know. This is before all young black men got all caught up in athletics and they didn't study. So we were scholar athletes. We were literally student athletes. So we actually went to class all the time and did the homework assignments. So when I got to Central State, you know, I studied real hard. I think the first 3 years I had a 4.0 at Central State. And then I sort of lost it because I was partying too much during my junior year. But we had already set a pattern in terms of being able to study. So I was president of the Honor Society on our campus. And we were so good that one of my best friends won a scholarship. We were that the Honor Society was giving, and we had to travel from Ohio to Arkansas for him to receive the scholarship. So we get there though. This was at Arkansas A&M and N. It's actually called University of Arkansas Pine Bluff now. So we get there, and there's these bourgeois Negroes. Okay, and we just completely felt out of place. So we just decided to make a statement. Now, neither one of us had suits. That was out of the question. So to rebel, my friend, since he was getting one of the scholarships, had to walk up on the stage. He decided to wear a Malcolm X t-shirt. Okay, everybody else is in suits, but he and I. And so he went up there to get that scholarship. And of course, as a faculty member, you know, who was a part of the faculty advisors for this honor society. And of course, he said, well, I ain't going to say anything about this, but it just shocked everybody. So our advisor, she cried because we had embarrassed her so bad by not showing up in suits. Okay. So, and of course, it got all the way back to the campus, and the president, you know, was upset with us that we had literally misrepresented the campus or misrepresented the university by being common Negroes who don't know how to dress.
Oh man, that is classic, man. What a time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you go into like history understanding that you would have to change and navigate through it? Like what really motivated you to get into history, knowing that most of history that was taught was white at the time?
Yes. Well, again, as I said, I had a problem with the basketball coach, so I ended up not being on the basketball team anymore. And literally, you know, they used to let athletes out for the 8th period of school, and because we'd go to practice. Well, after I left the basketball team, or actually were forcibly left off the basketball team, I still had the 8th period. So I didn't want to go home because my mother would ask, why are you home? How come you're not still in school? School doesn't get out to 3:30. So I started going to the library and reading. There was one shelf in the library of books about Black people. James Weldon, you said I could name these books. James Weldon Johnson's The Longest Way, Lerone Bennett Jr.'s Before the Mayflower. Then, of course, things like Willie Mays' The Say Hey Kid, Jim Brown's Off My Chest, Bill Russell, Go Up for Glory. So you see, I was still reading sports, but I got the Black history books sort of intermixed with that, which indeed sort of motivated me then to want to learn more, because there was only one shelf, you know, in the library with Black books. So I ended up moving to Flint, Michigan after I graduated because I couldn't find a job in my little hometown. And lo and behold, they had a bookstore. So I was able to buy Malcolm X's autobiography. I was able to buy Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro, and in paperbacks. They were 95 cents. You think about it, today, you can't buy any of that stuff for 95 cents. This is 1968 when I was doing all of this reading. So again, I went to college at Central State then in 1969 with a mission to become a history teacher, and my goals were real limited then. I was going to become a history teacher and go back to my little hometown and teach Black history. Fortunately, I ran into my advisor who encouraged me to go into graduate school, and so I went to Ohio State. And
At the time, just that concept in your mind was a new concept because there was no Black history. There was no Black history curriculum. There was no.
no,
So you originated this concept in your mind just from reading about these Black sports heroes that you had,
yes,
that you were going to go and do this in the schools, but there was no
yes,
concept of it. You had no idea of it. No one
I
was.
know I had no way of even designing a course. I just had to sort of make it up as I went along. And indeed, of course, I started out with basically a chronological interpretation and presentation, from Africa, to the present. So, obviously, I focused on things like the African tradition, the slave trade, antebellum slavery, of course, civil rights. One of my first books was on civil rights. Then, as I developed and did more research, obviously I learned more about our participation in the American Revolution, in the Civil War, about free African Americans during slavery, about people like Ida B. Wells and Mary McLeod Bethune, and I learned how to sort of integrate those the African American history. Here's the key too. I actually started teaching at Ohio State. I taught my first class, let's see, at Ohio State in 1974, and I taught the U.S. History Survey course. Well, actually, it was a small one. It wasn't one of the big ones. One of the small ones, about 30 students, and I integrated African American history into the U.S. History Survey, and I got all these complaints from this.
I was just going to ask.
This course has too much Black history, and it's almost like they didn't realize, like most Americans, that Black history is included and is in all aspects of American history. You can't teach American history without teaching our history. So in one sense, Morgan Freeman's right that Black history is American history, but you can sort of separate it out because our history is sort of special in terms of literally being the contradiction to American history in a very real sense. Okay, just one thing. For example, I started teaching what I called the Southern Strategy during the American Revolution. We learned the great stories about the fathers of the founding fathers, and Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death, and Benjamin Franklin and Samuel Adams, and these guys, and they're fighting for liberty. They're fighting for American independence. And of course, there's a major contradiction there.
Yes,
They're
sir.
enslaving all these Africans, denying them the very thing that they say that they're fighting for. So I always talk about sort of the latter part of the war, how the British come up with this Southern strategy. That is, they go down to Georgia. They start with the Southern campaign, where they go down to Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina, and they decide. They finally got smart because they refused to use Africans in the war. So they finally got smart. They said, you know what? They got all those Negroes down there in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. If we go down there and offer them freedom and then put weapons in their hands, that will shock the hell out of the Americans. And so that's what they did. And so that literally turned the whole course of the war by what they called the Southern Strategy, by going to South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, arming Africans, and indeed turning the tide of the war. So, but literally though, one incident sort of stopped them from winning the war. The French Navy was able to defeat the British Navy off the coast of Virginia so that they could not supply Cornwallis and these Negroes and these British soldiers, so that he had to surrender at Yorktown in 1781. So again, but up until that, they had changed the whole strategy and the whole direction of the war. And then the British kept their bargain. All the Negroes that fought with them, they gave them freedom. They took them to Canada, to Nova Scotia. They took them over to Africa, created a new nation, Sierra Leone. So these are stories that are American history stories, because most people don't know that some 20,000 Africans fought with the British. Only 5,000 fought with the Americans, because the Americans weren't willing to give them the freedom that the British promised and followed through on. So again, I learned these type of little details so that you could tell a different story. It's an American story that's not generally taught in American public education. You would think, if the way they used to teach the American Revolution, that these rich white guys got out there and fought the British and won this war, and everybody else just sort of sat there and watched what was happening. It didn't get involved. So here we get all these Negroes, all these Africans, 20,000 of them
Wow.
fighting for the British in the South, and turning the whole war campaign around. And literally, I always tell my classes that if the British Navy had been able to supply Cornwallis and Virginia, we'd all be speaking with a British accent.
Yes,
Imagine that. Because the British would have won the war.
Yes, sir.
With these Negroes, putting the weapons in the hands of these Africans in the South, and using what we call the Southern strategy. So it's just great stories like that indeed is American history, but in order to be exclusionary, they literally leave our story out of the mainstream story. So we end up learning about George Washington and Patrick Henry, these great patriots, and of course Jefferson didn't fight in one battle. Patrick Henry didn't fight in any battle. Washington did, of course, but again, we don't even learn about the Africans who fought and who indeed made that bargain and got their freedom and went to Nova Scotia after the war and to Sierra Leone.
Man, appreciate that history. Definitely didn't know that. Something new. So you're teaching these new concepts, Black history in these schools. I know this Black History Month is about Black labor, so we definitely got to talk about your experience, as a laborer, teaching Black history in these schools. How did your colleagues respond? How did the students respond? And walk us through that progression of that.
Sure. As I said, when I started teaching the U.S. History Survey at Ohio State, while I was still a graduate student, as I completed my master's degree and was still working on the PhD, as I said, I got all these complaints about teaching too much Black history. And in fact, I got self-conscious about it because I was getting that complaint almost every semester, that this is just too much Black history in this course. And I'm thinking there's certain things you literally have to talk about. So, there were 51 classes in a semester. So I actually went back and looked at the times that I actually taught Black history as a part of American history. It was, out of 51 classes, it was 7 times. There was only, that sort of was natural in terms of the teaching of American history. 7 times. And the students couldn't handle hearing about Black history 7 times.
What was your student demographic? What was your student demographic at the time?
Oh, okay. Oh, obviously, majority white. Ohio State is majority white.
Yes, sir.
So then when I started teaching professionally on my own, I started getting some of the same complaints, and even some challenges, from some of the white students who would go home and tell their parents some of the things I was teaching that contradicted, what they had been taught, traditionally in American history courses, that whole Southern strategy, or, the fact that African Americans sort of freed themselves from slavery during the Civil War. The way we get it is we sort of sat on our hands and waited till Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. That's a lie, we sort of forced the issue. Or the other side of it was they would teach that the Civil War, or they believed, based on what they had learned through grade school and high school, that the Civil War was about states' rights and had nothing to do with slavery. Come on. Anyway, so those were the kind of reactions I was getting. That a lot of the students, now I'd say 80%, literally couldn't deal with what was being taught from a sort of an African perspective. But there indeed were enough students who did like what I was doing, and sort of opening their eyes and challenging some of the things that they had traditionally believed.
Now this is Dr. Dulaney, this is your job, right? Like, you're getting paid to do this. You're in a college setting. You're teaching majority white students.
Mhm.
Why not just do what they wanted you to do and teach the white history? Why did you put up a fight? Why was this something worth fighting for you?
Because I felt that since I had been miseducated throughout my educational career, at least until I got to college, that I wasn't going to perpetuate the same miseducation, and I literally had to sort of felt I had to take a stand, and I thought that it was my duty, my how can I put it? Let's just say my consciousness would not allow me to just go in and teach the same old pap that I had gotten through the 12 years of my own education, and again, what was also happening, as I said, was we were learning more and more in the profession itself. Some great books were coming out in the early 70s because of this emphasis, this switch from literally teaching the party line to indeed making a conscious effort to teach the complete story of American history versus this select part where all these white men, these great white men, did everything and were responsible for all of us being free, as if we played no role in it. One book, for example, that came out in 1974, it's called Black Majority, Negroes in Colonial South Carolina from 1670 to the Stonewall Rebellion. Now, no one ever taught us that Africans were the majority in the South Carolina colony, that they outnumbered whites at one point almost 2-1. And therefore, they indeed had this tremendous impact on the South Carolina colony, that as a result of there being a majority, they hung on to all this African culture. They created things such as the ring shout, Gullah Geechee culture, and spoke Gullah, all these things that were never taught in mainstream American history. So indeed, it was just fun changing and challenging the norms and the sort of traditional interpretations of American history.
Yes, sir. Now walk us through, like, the normalization of Black history being taught in schools and what you were able to witness. Were you able to gather together with other colleagues and make this push in other states and throughout the
I'll
country?
give my professors at Ohio State some credit. Now, all of them in the history department but one were white. So, you mentioned that ASALH was doing African Americans in labor. So I took labor history. In fact, I took military history, labor history, intellectual history, social justice history, the constitutional history. And then all those classes, the professors allowed me to do something really special. They allowed me, when I had to do the papers, the research papers for, your graduate class, so all graduate students have to do research papers. So they let me do papers dealing with African American labor, African American military history, African American intellectual history. So I really got something special, so that I learned, the the general things that they were teaching about military history, but I got to look at it from an African-American perspective. I don't know why they let me do that, but almost every one of them, felt like uh, that I should be allowed to look at the African-American perspective in military history, labor history, and so on. So basically, I got a very good graduate education because I had liberal professors, who let me do what I wanted to do.
Not only did you push it in the college setting, but you made a push to push, the Black history into the K through 12 curriculum in the Dallas area. So what inspired you to go from the college to that level K through 12, and what was the
Sure.
experience like getting it in there?
Sure. What happened was, what I found was that even though we were getting a better interpretation and the inclusion of the African American experience on the college level in the public schools, the Black history had not filtered down. So, and then there was some backlash in about the mid and late 70s to Black history in the public schools. I was in Springfield, Ohio for about 3 years working at Wittenberg University. And lo and behold, I found that the school board was going to consider, I don't know who brought this to my attention, but the school board was considering removing the Black history, getting rid of the Black history course. Because they said the students weren't taking it and it wasn't no longer necessary. So they would literally teach, treating the Black history course like it was just a passing fad. Those Negroes wanted it in the early 70s. Now they don't want it anymore. So we're going to get rid of it. So I became part of the movement then in Springfield, Ohio, with some other community members to preserve the Black history course in the school curriculum at the two high schools in Springfield. Then when I came here, I found sort of the same thing happening. My son went to basically an all-Black elementary school, okay, here in Dallas. I remember going to a program, it was called Culture Night, and it was a shame. They went through German culture, Italian culture, French culture, Polish culture, everybody's culture, but no Black culture. I said, are they kidding me? That they have all these Black students and they're not going to deal with Black culture? So I went to my son's teacher, and of course she has Ronald Reagan on the wall, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, the traditional stuff. I said, wait a minute, there's nothing in this class but Black students. And you're not showing them any images of any Black people who have ever done anything in history. She said, well, I wouldn't know how to get those images. And then she was sort of right. Hadn't been in this field myself as long as I have. When I first started, there was no internet, not in no way to get these images. And so you literally had to work. Fortunately, we had two Black bookstores in Dallas at that time. So they had, Fannie Lou Hamer and Marcus Garvey, and, they had the Black images. So I went and bought 10 of them and said, hey, here you go. Put these up so that these kids will see people who look like them versus Ronald Reagan and George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and, come on. So that got me engaged in terms of helping the public schools to begin to integrate their curriculum. So I've been volunteering at the African American Museum here since about 1985, 1986. So one of the things that we did is that we began to teach a sort of a professional course, for, an African American history course for teachers, so that they would learn how to integrate their classes with African American content. So I'm sort of doing it part time, and we might have done it twice a year. I got a good colleague here who was director of social studies for the Dallas Independent School District. So we we developed what we called the Community African American History course, and then a sort of a professional development course for teachers in the Dallas Independent School District, so that they would at least get the content, because that was a key issue that we found. We found that most teachers teaching history and social studies literally, that nothing literally had changed in terms of their preparation. They still were not getting Black history in their education courses, in the education programs, and at TCU and at UT Arlington and other places in the area, and in college in general. And you could go through the teacher education training program at most universities and still not get any Black history or topics in social studies that would prepare them to teach Black children. So that's part of why I got involved, because I felt we just have to do this. I don't want. I said I don't want another generation to go through what I went through, where I didn't hear about anybody who looked like me until I got to college. So then I retired from teaching in 2016, and I was going to write a book, but I had a couple things thrown at me almost immediately, and I laugh to this day about this. The Fort Worth School District had progressive social studies coordinator who wanted to infuse African and African American history and culture into social studies, into Texas history, into language arts. And so he called. Well, they asked for a proposal. So and three people sent me the RFP, and I said, I don't want to do this. I'm retired. So so then one of my favorite students said it to me sort of a third or fourth time. So I said, okay, they're not going to leave me alone on this. So I'm just going to go ahead and submit the RFP, the proposal, thinking that since I sent it in at the last minute, I wouldn't get it anyway, and I'd be able to live my life in peace without having to do this work. Well, obviously, I got it. So I spent about 3 years working with the Fort Worth School District, putting together instructional materials and curricula, and basically, what do they call them? The lesson plans on how you can integrate African American and African history and culture into social studies, history, language arts, and so on. And that was a very good experience. Then, after I finished that, Dallas, which had an African American history course, but they had gotten rid of it again. The same old game that faced the problem in Springfield in the 70s. So here we are in 2019 now, dealing with the same issue of that the Dallas School District had gotten rid of the Black History course. So we had to redesign the Black History course for the Dallas School District and even come up with a textbook. But the great thing was, me and my colleague, Robert Edison, we designed the course, and it actually became the course that the state of Texas adopted as the African American Studies course. So it was a good experience. We spent about 6 months, creating the course and designing the course, and then preparing teachers to teach it. So
I mean, to get that done in Texas, I think is very fascinating.
Then the irony was 2 years later, the governor don't want critical race theory taught, don't want anything controversial taught, and he don't want those kids to know that they were racist and harassing and beating up Black kids who were trying to integrate to schools. They don't want that taught. Me and my friend Robert, we get a kick out of how they try to suppress history and ban books. You get that, and you ask, what are they afraid of? Come on. We're supposed to be this democratic and open society, and they're banning books and trying to restrict the teaching of Black history. They lump it all under critical race theory. And I don't know whether you saw last week, Donald Trump basically said that he was not going to give any money to schools that was teaching critical race theory. And again, critical race theory has this big umbrella. That's civil rights, and that's slavery, and anything controversial in Black history. So
The struggle continues. My theory behind that is that when you infuse the Black history into American history, the heroes don't really look like heroes anymore. You know what I'm saying? And I think that is a major problem
Yeah.
when it comes to American history. If your heroes, your founding fathers are not heroes anymore, what does that do to the collective consciousness of your white children? I think that's a major issue.
Shoulders.
Yeah. So I think they see that, they understand that, and I think that they're like,
You know,
we're
and
not.
I think the other thing, because I've been asked a number of times, why do I think they're trying to suppress the teaching of Black history? And of course, I think it's, if you learn Black history, you develop a certain empathy and understanding, and it stops you in some cases from being a racist. And they still want to, being a white supremacist, but you learn that they're not supreme and better than any other person. So electing Trump is all about maintaining white supremacy.
Very, very interesting. Now, what a battle, man. And kudos to you for making this happen in Texas. I think Texas, I don't know if it was Texas, but I remember there was a state that was promoting that slavery was more indentured servitude, and it wasn't really. Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, Texas had a part of their curriculum in which they were saying that they were there's a term they use. It may have been the indentured servitude, but then of course in Florida is where they said that the people who were enslaved benefited and learned skills.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
uh,
So, yeah, it's really interesting. So one would think, like, I mean, you've had this battle. It seems like since the beginning of you teaching Black history. One would say, like, I know in a previous interview you mentioned that you actually spoke to a Jewish person before, and they mentioned that they were teaching Jewish history in the churches, and they were kind of confused as to why Black people were so interested about teaching history in the school. So my question to you would be like, why do you think it is such a necessity to fight for this battle to get Black history taught in schools if we can go other routes like the church, like the Jewish people do and other cultures do, or other programs or other community-based programs that would be less of a fight? So why do you think it's that important that we got to fight to get it in the school system?
well, because we're paying for the schools to teach our children properly and about their history now. And again, it's almost like, we pay taxes and we support the schools, the police, and we almost don't really benefit from any of those institutions that we pay for. So part of I think is that that the schools are sort of a natural place that you need to be teaching Black history and of course women's history and so on, so that you diversify and show the kids at an early age, who they are, what their ancestors have done, and how they have been a part of this American experience. Now, having said that, obviously what I've found that few teachers are really qualified to teach it right and comprehensively. So, one of the things we've done with ASALH is we created the Freedom School Initiative, so that we indeed are teaching Black history at the African American Museum, at churches, and making it available and we're doing it primarily to counter, the fact that 22 states have passed these measures to restrict the teaching of Black history. And again, they lump it on this nonsense of critical race theory when no public school is teaching critical race theory. But again, they're lumping Black history and women's history and, Black history and Latino history under this nonsense about critical race theory. So we're just saying, okay, we've learned our lesson in that we've seen that you're not prepared to teach it, you don't want to teach it. Then when you do teach it, you don't want to teach it right. So we indeed want to do the freedom schools so that we control the curriculum, and we know what the people in the community will get, and as well as what the young people will get by coming to the freedom schools. We can control the curriculum.
Yes,
Just like
sir.
Jewish Americans controlling the curriculum of teaching their history, we want to do the same thing.
I'm all for that, and I think that that is where the next initiative should be because
Mhm.
I think the fight is just too much in the schools, and like you
Mhm.
mentioned, are these teachers even qualified, and do they
Right.
want to? Do they even if we force them to, do they want to teach our
No,
kids Black history? And oftentimes they don't. So
they don't want to do it. They'll say, "Well, this is just one more thing I got to do, and I gotta be able to prepare them for this test
they don't
that I'm going to
they
be judged by."
now every year I ask my students, in any school that I've been to, like, what did you learn this month for Black History Month? What
Mhm.
did your teacher do? What did and more times than not, if it's not a teacher of the culture, they just skipped it for the
Yeah,
most part and they didn't learn anything. So
true.
um so for those that are really interested, that's listening to you, Dr. Dulaney, you have the information, you've created the curriculum, you've done the work. Um, what does it look like for those that just don't know, Dr. Dulaney? I don't really know Black history. I don't know what to teach. What does your curriculum really look like? What does it entail?
Mhm.
And then there's also this ideology of should we really start from slavery? Is that a negative kind of place to start? Where do we start
Um,
from? What does it look like?
no, what does the curriculum look like? You know, having again taught Black history for 50 years plus, we start with African history and African culture. You have to, just like when they teach American history, they start in Europe. The Greeks and the Romans as sort of setting the tone and in terms of democracy and arts and sciences. So we have to start in Africa because it sort of grounds us into in who we are and where we came from. Imagine, what again, you've asked me about some of my motivations. You know, growing up, not knowing where you came from, that's a hell of a situation. And I think back that, not until college that I really understood where I came from. And so, now I'll say that it didn't necessarily hurt me in terms of my self-image, but once I did learn, it improved my self-image. It helped me to ground myself. It helped me to place myself in history. So basically, we want to start with Africa. We want to start the curriculum in Africa. Then, of course, African culture, because some of the cultural characteristics that we still have, comes out of Africa. Africa. Uh, you know, uh, Stokely Carmichael used to say that you know we might straighten our hair and do all these things to try to be white, but he used to say, when it rains, Africa will bring you back. And he actually said that little thing one time. And it was, and I don't think most people got it. Okay, but Africa will bring you back. So indeed, we have to start with Africa, and then of course we can start with the fact that, well, we can include the fact that slavery existed in Africa. There's research and scholarship that deals with the enslavement in Africa, pointing out some of the differences between enslavement in Africa versus the enslavement here in the Western Hemisphere, which was race-based. And then we obviously got to deal with the slave trade. Most of us don't know that about 15 million of us were captured in the slave trade and brought here, and maybe 9 million of us survived the Middle Passage and so on. So, and that's important because it, knowing we survived the Middle Passage says a lot about us or our ancestors because they were strong enough to endure one of the most terrible voyages ever in human history. So then, of course, we have to deal with the enslavement here because we set the tone. In fact, we made the American colonies profitable. We made the United States of America um, profitable. It's our enslavement and our work that grew the nation's chief staple from 1800 to 1860, cotton. and cotton changed the country's economic balance of payments, and it's our labor that did that, and we need to know that. So, and the fact that we survived in enslavement, but of course, we got to balance that with about the 10% of African Americans who were free prior to the Civil War. And anyway, there's just all kinds of stories you can tell and information you can provide students so that they get a good picture of what our ancestors went through and how we got to where we are today. Because typically, before the 60s in the Black Studies movement, we didn't know where we came from. We had a vague conception of who we were. It was so bad. I'll tell you this story just to tell you the importance of knowing our history. I guess in 1960 or maybe 1961, they were celebrating, I guess, the 100th anniversary of the Civil War. Okay, in my elementary school, for some reason they were dividing us up into the rebels and the Yankees. Okay, giving us the little caps that they wore during the Civil War when the soldiers wore. So, the teacher knew I was from Alabama. So guess what? She gave me a Confederate Army cap. Think about that.
Fascinating.
So I end up being on the side that was fighting for slavery because I didn't know my history. I had no clue.
I actually can relate to that because for me, elementary, I remember singing about the voyages of Christopher Columbus. Like we had a school assembly, like, I still remember it, like Columbus sailed over the ocean, like all of that. And, Columbus had one of the biggest impacts on my culture as a Haitian, born person. And it's fascinating, man. So I connect to that.
So here I am, a Confederate soldier at age 10, fighting for the Confederacy and to keep my people in slavery.
Man, so so just some things with the curriculum. Right now, these kids now, they like the technology, and I speak to a lot of Black professors and people that do teach Black history, and they do give some complaints that the kids are like, "This is boring. Like, I don't want to hear about what happened in so and so and so. Like, it's boring." Like, is there in your mind like a way to make it more exciting for the
Sure.
kids?
Sure. That story about the Southern strategy, that's one I tell that tends to wake students up. Then, as I said, since I've been teaching Black history since 1975, and there was few resources at that time. But now there's films, there's websites. Now we don't want to make the students act out being slaves. We don't want the students to act out being beaten up on the buses and in terms of desegregation. But there are indeed all these films and websites. Now, one of the books I've been recommending in terms of my own teaching, as well as some of the ones we've been using in the one we've been using in the Freedom School, is called Black History 365. It really exciting book in terms of graphics and maps. It's 800 pages, by the way, and it has these QR codes that take students to websites so that they can see short films, they can see video presentations and maps and graphics, so that indeed there are just so much material out there now that even if you can't afford Black History 365, on the internet, there's just a ton of stuff that you can pull off and use in terms of images and maps and music. Wow. So there's no way that teaching Black history should be boring and that you just got to go there and lecture every day. You can, there's just so many ways now that you can make the class interesting, with maps, with graphics, with film clips, and um, websites, and they can see art. You know, oh my goodness, I get excited just thinking about it and talking about it because, as I said, when I started, we struggled. Me and Robert, we used to create our own handouts because they weren't these, little handouts with exercises on them related to African American history. So we had to create a lot of that stuff ourselves. Then, I don't know how far this podcast is going to go. We would pirate stuff off of PBS to show in the class.
Gotta do what you gotta do, man. Gotta do what you gotta do.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
so
So
indeed.
so where we actually have our own, school too, MasterMine University, and we do it through storytellers. I think the kids like storytellers, and
Uh-huh.
I think that's a great way to make it interesting for the kids with the African
Yes.
drums and the, sharing the stories and things like that. So, for anybody wondering how to make it interesting, I think
Hmm.
storytelling is a great way to get, storytellers
Yes.
from the culture and have them infuse it with the kids. So that's what we've been doing, and I think it's been working.
Okay. Yes.
Um, S Another thing, people that obviously are not familiar with history, they're gonna tell you, well, Black History Month is the shortest month of the year, and why'd they even give us this month? It's it just doesn't even make any sense. So, you are part of the organization, in which Carter G. Woodson started, who is the person that fought for all of this. So, can you give us some accuracy and some information just
Sure.
behind Black History Month and what it was designed to do and how it
Sure.
progressed?
Yeah. All right. That and I actually go out and say this every February. In that it started out as Negro History Week in 1926, and it was Negro History Week was designed by Carter G. Woodson as a way of as a culmination. And listen to this: a culmination of a year-long study of Negro history. That he didn't just want to confine the study and celebration of Negro History Week or till 1 week. He chose the second week in February because of the birthday of Abraham Lincoln on February the 12th, the birthday of Frederick Douglass on February the 14th, because he thought those were the two most influential Americans who, in terms of the freeing of African Americans from enslavement. Now, uh, when we expanded Negro History Week to Black History Month in 1976, that was part of the bicentennial. The nation was celebrating its 200th anniversary, so we decided to expand Negro History Week to Black History Month, mainly because so many other people, African Americans, were born in February. Um, Langston Hughes was born in February. W.E.B. Du Bois, I believe, was born in February. So we saw February as a very special month in terms of the number of famous African Americans who were born then. But we also then expanded Negro History Week to a month because we felt that we should indeed celebrate African American history for more than just 1 week in February. But again, the argument and the goal was that African American students, because essentially when they started Negro History Week, schools were segregated, and so the black teachers in those black schools in the South, in particular, were supposed to do something every week in terms of preparing these black students to understand Black history. So, but then in that second week in February is when they would present their skits, present their papers, present their artwork after something they had been working on all year long. So basically, what we were attempting to do, or what Woodson was attempting to, not confine Black history to just 1 week in February, but make that sort of the culmination of a year-long study of African American histories. So that's
Mm,
the rationale.
got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, another argument with Black history is like, all right, I've been emotional learning some of Black history and some of these harsh things that have occurred to Black people. Now, when do we give this reality to these little kids, and do we even give it to these little kids and talk about some of the massacres, some of the murders and the
Yeah.
lynchings, and
Yes. Again, you do indeed need to let them get old enough to understand the massacres, uh, what happened in Greenwood in Oklahoma, what happened in Rosewood, Florida, so that they're not traumatized by this violence. Fortunately, in a way, when I think back to my own education in this field, I'm sort of glad I didn't know about some of this violence and the bloodshed and the massacres and the treatment of Africans and Black people throughout history e- in the slave trade as well as here in this country, so that when I did encounter it, I was pretty much an adult, and so I could digest it. But I do think you can teach, about these massacres and racial discrimination in such a manner that the students can understand it without being traumatized. One of the interesting things is, Jewish students learn about the Holocaust uh, from almost age 5, and all it does is make them more aware. It doesn't necessarily traumatize them. From what I've read and understood, can come to understand, doesn't traumatize them. It just raises their consciousness, because one of the things they teach in the Jewish community: never again will we allow this Holocaust to happen. And so this is probably something we should adopt, but we just got to figure out a way to do it. And again, part of what's happening with these state legislatures, they're trying to stop us from teaching about these things that have been done to African Americans throughout history. But I'd say age 10, 11, and 12, I think students are ready to learn about slavery, to learn about the massacres, and to learn about segregation and discrimination, and to be exposed to these things that it shouldn't be as traumatizing to them at those ages. So, but again, we don't want to teach them at 5 and 6 years old.
Agreed, 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 agreed. Thank you for that. I definitely agree with that point. Now, I think part of Black history and history itself is analyzing these moments and, allowing your imagination to wander sometimes. So I want to just do a little activity here with allowing our imaginations to wander. Little what if we could do that. Um, After slavery, there were talks about, the enslaved Black people going back to Africa, back to Africa. And that was a concept. Thoughts about that, and thoughts of what if Black people did go back to Africa?
Wow, that's a tough one, because as you know, Lincoln, actually, when he began contemplating emancipating us or freeing us from enslavement, he indeed wanted to ship us to either the West Indies or possibly back to Africa. Now, it, it's sort of implausible um, to do something like that because of the cost. And then where would they send us, or where could they have sent us after the end of slavery? Because you just can't dump. There were 4 million Black people in this country in 1860. So what do you dump 4 million people?
Some did go to Liberia, right?
Yes, yes, but the numbers were small in terms of those who went back and founded, who went back, and they're starting in the 1840s. Actually, it was a little sooner than that. In the 1820s, they started going back to Liberia, but it was small numbers, 100 here, maybe a couple hundred there, and so that was possible to be done. But in 1860 or 1865, 4 million people. Think about all the ships you would need. Think about all the money that you would need. Now, the British, as I said, took 20,000 out, and took some to Nova Scotia and then some to Sierra Leone. And that seemed to have been a very possible uh, transport, or they indeed sort of prepared. Now, I know the ones in Nova Scotia did have a hard time. The ones that went to Nova Scotia did have a hard time because of the weather and the fact that the land that they were settled on wouldn't grow anything. And so some, of course, migrated back to the United States, and then some went on to Sierra Leone. But and so indeed, if you'd have had too many people there in Nova Scotia, they would have starved to death. So it's just
Now, for
lifting us back. I can't imagine it. It's just
for imagination's sake, if it did happen, do you think it would have a positive impact or a negative impact on Black people as a whole?
I'd say to have a positive impact. One of the believe it or not, there's been several Back to Africa movements. Starting with the Liberian movement in the 1880s and 1890s. Then, of course, Marcus Garvey envisioned our going back to Africa. And then some Pan-Africanists in the 60s envisioned it, and some did go back. But in fact, if we went back, it would be positive because we bring all of our skills and our resources, I hope, back to Africa, and would have the impact of bringing all these people with skills and talent and ability to make Africa, I won't say it like Israel, but at least to raise the standard of living in Africa. Because if I went back, that's what I'd do. I'd be, working, I'd be teaching and, working with other Africans there, to make Africa, what Marcus Garvey saw, make Africa to be the United States of Africa.
Yeah, that is definitely something to ponder about. Now, if you talk to a lot of elders that lived through segregation and desegregation, I've spoken to elders that have said that Black people were smarter, they were more educated, the economy was better for Black people during segregation because they had no choice, and desegregation kind of messed that all up. So, what is your opinion on that whole concept? And then, what do you think? What if desegregation never occurred?
Sure. I've heard that argument a number of times, where you had African Americans saying we were better off during segregation because, like you said, we had our own businesses, we had our own communities, we had our own schools, and things were better then. I don't buy that because I don't buy things being better. I'd say we existed and we may do, but when you're restricted just because of your skin color, it literally sends a message that you're not good enough. And if you get the message, if you go outside of your community, you're going to get killed or beaten up or harassed, and nobody's going to do anything about it. So, I think of Du Bois, for example, when he was coming, when he was doing research, he couldn't go to archives. He couldn't go to certain libraries in the country. So there were just certain things he could not do just because of his skin color, and so that limited his ability to be. Indeed, he was a great historian, but it limited his ability to be an even greater historian. And of course, you think of all the baseball players who played in the Negro Leagues, who were great, but the fact that they couldn't compete against whites, obviously made it seem like, well, the white players are always better because they played in the superior league. So, so my imagination would be, okay, if we continued segregation, yeah, we would have done okay, and we would do okay because we had literally learned how to make a way out of no way. That is, we took the limited resources and the limited opportunities and created community. And again, and you can't argue, we don't have that community anymore that we used to have. One of the things when I was growing up that was always said was that you had to behave even when you were away from home, because everybody in the community was watching you and making sure you stayed in line and you didn't embarrass your parents. And if you did, they call your parents. Now it's like nobody gives a damn what you do. So anyway, here's another theory though that sort of supports the notion in terms of supporting segregation. One of my books is on the police. It's called Black Police in America.
I have that book. Yep.
You have my book. All right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I wish I had it with me right now. I have it in my living room.
So in the book, there's a chapter on Black police associations, where the Black police associations in New York, the Shield Club, the Guardians, the Afro-American Patrolmen's League, literally sort of take on this idea that they must represent and protect the community from the brutality by white police officers. And then, of course, the idea for even having Black officers came from middle-class African Americans and leaders, the NAACP and the Urban League, and some church leaders, that if we had Black officers, it would solve the crime problem and it would solve the police brutality problem. One, Black officers, since they lived in the community, would know who the criminals were and get them off the streets, stop them from committing crimes. Then two, they know who the law-abiding citizens are. So they're not going to be brutalizing and beating up doctors and lawyers and ministers and innocent Black women on the streets. And so basically that was the argument that was used in the early 20th century for hiring African Americans as police officers. They're in the community and they're going to represent the community. Well, with integration, Black officers move. Well, for example, here in Dallas, they moved to Plano. They moved to McKinney. They don't even want to live in the community, So they're just as bad as the white officers. So this ideal and this experiment that was pushed in the early 20th century just literally failed because the officers moved out of the community. They wanted to be like the other middle-class Negroes and move to the suburbs. They don't want to live in Dallas. They don't want to live in. So we have an area called South Dallas that's considered to be, a high crime area. They don't want to live in South Dallas. They don't want their houses broken in and all this stuff. So basically then we lost these contributing members to our community who are actually the guys carrying the guns and the badges. They live in Plano. And so they're just as bad as the white officers in terms of how they think of Black people who live in the city. Isn't that something?
Definitely is, man.
Yeah.
So I feel like you're kind of in the middle with the whole desegregation. You're saying
I am.
it would have definitely limited opportunities, but we would have been more community based.
Yeah, we'd have been more community based, and we'd have had the role models in the community, and not leaving and living outside the city where they have no connection, and therefore they don't feel like, well, I need to come back and work in the Black high school, or be a part of send my kids to that Black high school and so on, so that, and then I'm going to be interested in another Black high school because my kids go there. Now, if it's a Black high school, I don't want my kid to go to an all Black high school.
Yes, sir. Heard it a million.
Well, that's the attitude. Mine did, My son went to an all Black high school.
It's not,
of course, great school.
It's not realistic, Dr. Dulaney. Like, they're gonna live in a world surrounded by a lot of different people. Why would I do that to them?
Well, he adjusted. He went to an HBCU too.
Oh man,
He adjusted. Again, just like with me, the best thing I did in my life, and he would also argue in his life, is that he went to an HBCU.
Man, fascinating. All right. Affirmative action, man. Some people are like, yo, we really didn't need this thing, man. Like, well, white folks have benefited more from this. The colleges just said we're not doing it anymore. We're not doing this whole affirmative action thing anymore for college students. It's not fair, da da da. So
Sure.
your take on that and your take on if it did not
Sure.
exist. It
Well,
is we are talking about, black labor for the month
yeah,
of February.
right. Let's just say without affirmative action, we wouldn't be where we are today in terms of being in various professions. I know I wouldn't be a former college professor without affirmative action. And of course, there's a book by Irv Katznelson called When Affirmative Action Was White, that basically in the 30s, as a part of the New Deal during the Roosevelt administration, most of the programs favored, promoting white people into the middle class. Then even after World War II, there was affirmative action through the GI Bill for white veterans. They got the jobs. If they had been flying planes during World War II, they got the jobs with the airlines. They didn't hire black pilots to be airline pilots after World War II. So we've seen how the government used affirmative action to promote white people, to help them get ahead, and they join the middle class. So affirmative action really worked for African Americans during the short time that it existed to at least get our feet or our foot in the door, because otherwise, they would not have done it. That is, the majority of white people would not have made the effort, and the government would not have made the effort to help us get ahead without affirmative action. So I'm a big supporter of affirmative action. When I hear some brother saying, I don't want affirmative action, I said, okay, sure. Yeah. You don't have to take it. You don't have to do it. Just stay back there where you are, wondering why you never got ahead. And here's the irony. You don't hear white men saying they don't want I don't want affirmative action. Of course, they don't call it that. They call it the old boy network, and the in fact, I don't know what they call the system today, but they hire each other.
Yes,
They
sir.
practice nepotism.
Yes, sir.
And they're not upset about it when it benefits them.
Yeah, I think those that oppose it have no idea how bad racism really is
Yeah.
and how it functions, They
Yes.
haven't lived through it and seen it, so they can't comprehend not getting a job no matter how smart you are or
Yeah.
how well you talk, and, that can't be possible. I'm gonna get it because I deserve it, so
Yeah.
it's interesting.
And
Very
they still think that we live under this merit system, that everybody gets ahead on the basis of their ability. And that's not necessarily true.
That part, yep, yep. I mean, even me, man, I've gotten positions because there was a school that I worked at that was specifically looking for a black male educator in the school. So, definitely benefited from
Yes.
affirmative action.
And of course, the real irony is those who get the opportunity, they pull the ladder up behind themselves. You heard of that, right?
Mm.
I'll say they don't want anybody else to look like them to come behind them. They pull that ladder up behind themselves so that the other brothers and sisters can't make it up to where they are. That's Clarence Thomas, for example. Well, he's pulled the ladder up so high that
Oh, man.
yeah. Well, anyway, affirmative action has been one of the best things this country has done, and it needed to be done.
Yes, sir. Agreed.
Because otherwise, based on just the attitudes, we see now with Trump coming back, the main thing they're going to do is end DEI, because he's so unfair to white people. And you look around, and of course, the other side of that is when you look around, I don't know where you are, you look around and you're there at this place. Everybody else is white. You're the only one. And so,
I'm in Long Island, so I know all about that, man.
yeah, yeah. So you say, and they're upset over affirmative action. I look around. Well, where are all these other black people have benefited from affirmative action? How come there aren't more people who look like me in this history department?
That's a fact. That is a
So,
fact.
again, then you heard of the glass ceiling report that the Clinton administration did, which showed that white women had been the chief beneficiary from affirmative action.
Indeed.
And they're not whining about them getting ahead. It's only when we, get a job here and there that they make up this nonsense. We got it just because we were black. Ain't that
Interesting. I would love to see how college admissions is going to impact white women um, with the removal of affirmative action. Interesting. All right, last one. So we all know that we've made a lot of strides as Black people in this country that ended up being through deterred because of assassination. So we talk about Dr. King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, Black Panther Party members like Huey P. Newton, Fred Hampton, Harry and Harriet Moore, and the list goes on and on. So what do you think? What would society be, in your opinion, if these assassinations never occurred?
Oh, wow. That's a great hypothetical, in that I think, I think Martin Luther King and Malcolm X would have joined hands and really helped to end racism in this country. Um, I think Martin Luther King, even though he wasn't a politician, would have probably perhaps been a senator or something, and continue to have this influence nationally as well as internationally. Malcolm X, even in his death, as has influenced just generations of African American men, including myself. And I think through the organizations that he had started, the organizations of African American Unity and the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, he had been a major player in organizing us politically, because that was where he was sort of headed in terms of, because the nation was sort of restraining him and keeping him out of politics, but he would become not a political boss per se, but the type of political leader that would have helped and motivated and organized a lot of Black men to become more politically active. And so, we've seen some things in many of the American cities, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, where Black mayors were elected, and where African Americans have made great strides in terms of politics and in having an influence on the directions of those cities. I think if Martin Luther King and Malcolm X had lived, we'd have made a lot more progress, because they were able to motivate people to get active and to participate.
Agreed. I think it also would have changed our fear of going against the system, kind of thing. I think Black people have this fear of, well, I don't want to be, I don't want to get caught up and be under FBI surveillance or be assassinated or attacked. And, so I feel like we don't do a lot of things that would benefit the community because of fear. So I think it definitely would have impacted fear. Yeah. So before we wrap up, I know that you are responsible for choosing the theme for Black History Month every year. So talk to us about what kind of goes into choosing these themes and what the purpose of that is, and
Sure.
what you want it to be.
We have a committee, sort of like the program committee for ASALH, and we look at various topics that we can use. In fact, some of them we repeated over the years. This year, this coming year, as you heard, there'll be African Americans in labor, and we thought that would be an appropriate theme, because one of the issues, of course, is Black unemployment and Black employment, and so we wanted to talk about the type of jobs we've held in the past, and our impact also on the labor market and the impact of Black unemployment and the impact of Black skilled labor in this country. So, if you go to our website, you'll find that there's an essay looking at African Americans and the labor movement and how important we have been as laborers, going all the way back, of course, to enslavement in terms of making America successful.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely important. Before we wrap up, I want to play a quick little activity called What's Your Favorite? Identifying a few of your favorite things. So what's been your favorite theme so far that you guys have done through Black History Month?
I'd have to say resistance. We did that 2 years ago, and it worked out perfectly because we went to Jacksonville. We went to Florida, and of course, as you know, a lot of the major African American organizations refused to go to Florida because of the governor there, who was a reactionary, and I'll just say it, an asshole. And so we had signed a contract with a hotel, so we debated and discussed not going to Jacksonville and to Florida because many of the Black organizations, were boycotting Florida. Well, since we had chosen Black resistance that year as our theme, we said, you know what? We're going to go to Florida and with a mission, with a purpose, that we're not going to be intimidated by the government there, that we are indeed going to use our theme. So we adopted this. We tied the theme to running to the fight. We're going there to show DeSantis that we're going to continue to promote Black history. We're going to do sessions for teachers on how to teach Black history. We're going to do a banned book reading in the center of the city in James Weldon Johnson Park. We did a big discussion with politicians and ministers at one of the oldest Black church in Jacksonville. So that just worked so perfectly for what we needed to do when we went to Jacksonville in 2023 for our national and annual conference, Black Resistance. Now, I also say, I also like the African Americans and the arts, because we actually did a exhibition here, looking at music, literature, decorative arts and dance, and in the exhibition was just perfect because we sort of capped it off with we played Soul Train episodes. Are you familiar with Soul Train? Okay, I didn't know how old or young you were. So, it was just mind-boggling because in the midst of, we had images of Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou, Gregory Hines, the Reverend James Cleveland, all these same famous artists in this gallery, and of course with descriptions of what they did and how they contributed not just to Black arts, but to the nation's arts. That we sort of carried the arts in this country. We were the innovators. So the Soul Train is playing, and you get three things there. You get the music, okay. You get Aretha Franklin and Marvin Gaye. Aretha Franklin and Marvin Gaye singing a duo, okay. You get the dances. You see all those old dances like the penguin and the robot and the Running Man, and then of course you get the style. Now, at the National Museum in D.C., have you been there?
I have not. That is
Oh man, you got to go.
on my bucket list.
Okay, you got to go. So, it's on 6 levels. The building is on 6 levels, and you start down there, of course, on the bottom with Africa, and then you got to go through slavery, segregation, and discrimination, and it's it's a hell of a slog to go from that bottom up to the top level. But when you get to the top level, it's music, it's dance, it's poetry, it's rap. I mean, it just enriches you, makes you feel good. That even though we've been through all of this, we still are the creative people in this country. So there's a quote in there, and we use this in the exhibit. A quote by George C. Wolfe, playwright. It says, "God created Black people, and Black people created style." Okay, and you know what I'm talking about. So we use that as the sort of the opening of this exhibit on African Americans in the arts, and then we just laid them out with, the literature and the music and the art, the dance, and then Soul Train just capped it off because you saw all those fashions that the dancers were dressed in, from the 6-inch heels and and the loud colors and then all the dance moves from the penguin to the running man, and the robot, and then just the music itself, just a heck of an experience.
Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Dulaney.
Yeah.
What has been your favorite teaching moment that you've had as an educator?
Let's see, my favorite teaching moment. Well, there's been a lot of them, so it's sort of hard to, if you've taught for 50 years, you have a variety of times that have been where you've gotten highs. I'd actually say my favorite teaching moment has been when I run into my former students and they tell me things that I taught them that I didn't know that I taught them. Okay. Um, I'm working with one of my former students in the Freedom School at the church in Arlington. And she told me 2 weeks ago, she says, the main thing I learned from you was don't come to class unprepared. I said, really? She says, yeah. She said, I remember I think she said 1991. She said, I remember I came to class. None of us had done the reading assignments, and you kicked us all out of the class. And then she said, I learned from that point on never to come to your class unprepared. So she said, that was the main thing that she learned from me. Again, I thought, well, she would have said, well, I learned about W.E.B. Du Bois or, some in the subject matter. But no, it's just the structural things. Don't come to class unprepared.
Got you. All right. What is your favorite Black history fact?
Well, I sort of mentioned the Civil War, the fact that we freed ourselves from slavery. When we were doing Black Resistance in 2022, actually 2023, that was last year. I did several presentations and using that theme, and I played the Frankie Beverly and Mays song to sort of open up that presentation, where the song is called "Running Away." Running away. We need what is it called? We need some rejuvenation. Running away. And of course, it's almost like that song is made for Black resistance, because in the Civil War, we began to free ourselves almost immediately from slavery by running away from slavery. The only thing that had kept us enslaved was that they had a slave patrol that, patrolled the roads every night in all the areas where there were enslaved people. And it's these poor white men riding on horses who, indeed, if they caught you off the plantation, would whip your butt. So when the Civil War starts, the slave patrol breaks down because they got to send all these white men to fight in the war. So there's no slave patrol. So basically, the roads opened up and Black people started running away by the hundreds, then the thousands, and they became a problem for the United States Army because so many of them were running away. So the Army was trying to figure out, do we return them to their owners, or do we keep them and so that we'll have to feed and clothe them and house them? Can we use them to support our war effort? And so that's a key moment in African American history, that we indeed started running away. and making slavery, our enslavement, the key issue of the Civil War. Most people don't understand that. They think that, as I said earlier, that we sat on our hands and waited for Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, and we were okay until then. Then we started running away. But no, they started running away from day one. And there's all this documentation. You asked me the question about, verification in history. Well, there's all these records at the National Archives called the Records of the War of the Rebellion. And what you find are these letters and newspaper articles about all these Black people running away from slavery, and their owners are trying to get them back. And the United States Army said, "Oh, hell no, we're not giving them back. Sorry." And so our running away was a phenomenon, of the Civil War that made a difference. Did you see Emancipation with Will Smith?
I have not seen that yet. You know what?
Okay.
I've been a little apprehensive about watching slavery movies.
Okay.
So I haven't really heard much about it.
Okay.
So you give me, like, should I see
Let
that?
me give you a synopsis, because it's a true story. That's the irony of it. It's Will Smith is enslaved in Louisiana, and he's taken away from his family and made to work for the Confederacy, building some type of fortifications. Okay, and they're just mistreated. They're sicking dogs on them. They're killing them if they get out of line. So finally, they rebel, and then Will Smith and two others just take off through the swamps. They hear that if we can make it to Baton Rouge, we will be free. So they sort of symbolized the whole concept of running away from slavery at the beginning of the Civil War. Again, they're working for the Confederate Army. These Confederates are just nasty. So indeed, at the beginning of the film, you don't want to see it because it got some of the cruelty and nastiness just turn your stomach, and you wonder, how can one human being, treat another human being like that? But anyway, Will Smith is the only out of the three that run away. He's the only one that sort of perseveres. He actually fights a crocodile in the swamp and still gets away. So toward the end, he finally thinks he's gotten away, okay? But this slave catcher finally has caught him. Well, the slave catcher's getting ready to shoot him, and lo and behold, these Black soldiers are camped further down the riverbank, and they see this, and they kill the slave catcher, and they rescue Will Smith. All right, and he goes into the camp. They give him a bath, and they see his back. His back is just beaten into, welts. He'd been whipped so badly. And so they take a photograph of him. And this was, again, a true story because the photograph was published in a newspaper in 1863. And so this becomes sort of the symbol of how terrible slavery was to enslaved people. And so it's a good movie because it represents that whole concept that I was pushing about running away. Here's
I
Will
want to watch it. I'm watching it.
symbolizing running away from slavery, going through hell to get away, but he makes it. And then he becomes this symbol. They publish this picture all over the world. You can look at it yourself. It's on the internet. It's called the picture of Whipped Peter. That's what it's called. The
I
photograph.
think I've seen it.
Yeah, I'm sure you have.
Yeah. I think it's a popular picture because
Yes,
the minute you mentioned it, it just popped into my head right away.
Yes, and so Will Smith then takes this real story, this true story, and he becomes a symbol again of one African Americans running away from slavery, and then this brother that they use to show the rest of the world how indeed Southerners treated and enslaved Africans.
So, man, I'm definitely checking it out.
Good movie.
Thank you for that.
Happy ending.
Yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Because we sometimes we don't see happy endings with these slavery movies and some of these mostly Black movies. So interesting. Check it out.
Sort of interesting that you said that because I had sort of developed sort of a resistance or antipathy against the slave movies too, because I said I can't sit and watch this, the cruelty. that they show a lot of times. Like 12 Years a Slave. I could barely get through that. Because that was just terrible. Lapita being treated so badly, raped and beaten up, and just terrible. Terrible situation. Yeah.
It's something definitely to dissect, but Nate Parker is one that he did.
Oh yeah, that was
Nat
the
Turner.
Nat Turner
Yeah,
revenge.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that
I don't
was
know.
bad.
I don't know, man. I
Yeah.
just
There's some scenes in that I couldn't stand.
yeah. So, but I'm definitely gonna see the Will Smith one. But thank you for encouraging me because
Yeah, go see that one. This has, like I said, happy ending, and it's historically accurate. That's
Yeah.
the other thing. I don't know about him fighting an alligator and beating an alligator, but at least in terms of what happens to him at the end, that's
Yes, sir.
historically accurate.
Yes, sir. What are some of your favorite books on Black history?
Oh wow, man. The Souls of Black Folk, by Du Bois. The Miseducation of the Negro. Let's see. I always start with those two. Believe it or not, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Frederick Douglass's narrative. What's it called? Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, written by himself. I love that book. I can vaguely go for Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington, because it's such a, how can I put it? It's an uplift book, how he goes from slavery to freedom and starts Tuskegee, and so it's a success story, although he's condescends, against Black people. So in fact, that's what makes it sort of interesting. But you contrast it with the Souls of Black Folk, with Du Bois just writing such beautiful literature, in that at that beginning section, where he says, "I sit with Shakespeare and he winces not." It's just a beautifully written paragraph about, that Black people should be able to learn and be a part of cultured society just like any white person. So I'd say The Souls of Black Folk is probably one of my very favorite books.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Last one. Favorite life gem that anybody has given you. So, any
Life what?
life gem, life advice, or anything that really helped you navigate life?
Let me see. Well, there's I'm trying to remember who said this, that you may not get all that you pay for, but you're definitely going to pay for all you get. I can't remember who said that, but that one indeed sort of has stuck with me. That and it's been real, that you work your butt off and you don't get rewarded for it. But and so indeed you don't get all that you work for and pay for, but you're definitely going to have to do it to get anything.
Yes, sir. Appreciate
Yeah.
that. So as we close out, Dr. Dulaney, what you've done so much, man, just for the Black collective, Black people, your writing, your activism, your teaching, everything. When it's all said and done, man, what is the legacy that you're looking to leave behind?
What is the legacy I'm going to live by, or the legacy I'm going to leave?
The legacy that you want to leave behind.
Well, I want to leave behind the idea that we got to continue to educate our children and our people, and be willing to do it without being paid. It's sort of been interesting being in this field, and this is going to take a minute, so bear with me. That I'm in this field because I love it. So, never look to really make any money. And now, ironically, it has brought in a little money in terms of some of the books I've sold and some of the projects I've worked with at various times in my life. And so I'm sort of struck by some of my colleagues who want to make a lot of money. I don't know whether you brought in some of these top scholars. They'll ask you $10,000 and $15,000, and you say, "Whoa, wait a minute." Now I understand in some cases this is it's a hassle being asked to come out and speak and do stuff, but at some point, you literally do have to give back to the community. So, um, and so I've had to deal with some of my colleagues, who ask for these big honorariums, and you say, "Wow, man, you're only going to speak an hour, and you want $10,000? Come on, what is that about? You're not poor, and you got a good life." I hope my legacy is that people came to understand that I do what I do in terms of teaching, because I think it's really necessary that we teach Black history to our community, and that we should not be demanding 5-figure, 6-figure honorariums just to go out and speak to the local church or the local school or something like that. That's ridiculous. And then the other irony was, too, when I first started out in my career back in the 70s, I remember running into a former student from Central State who was in business, and I guess he was making $50,000-$60,000, and so he says to me, because I was actually in graduate school, and he says to me, "Man, you're still in school, and you're still in that Black stuff. You ain't ever gonna make any money." Well, that Black stuff, you ain't gonna make any money with that Black stuff. You need to get yourself a legitimate career. That's what it's. So you see, I remember that when someone that tells you that because you're trying to do something beyond, just making money, that you're trying to make a difference and help the people in your community, because that's one of the things that the Black Studies movement sort of pushed, that we were supposed to get the skills, the training, the information, and come back and share what we learned with our community.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you've been doing, and definitely have dealt with scholars that charge quite a bit for their presence.
Isn't
And
that something?
yeah, I mean, to a degree, I understand they do have to make a living, but I had one scholar that came on one time, and he tried to ask me for triple the amount the second time. Um, and to me, that's I think for to charge us is one thing, but to charge institutions where they have the money, they have it in the budget, that's I think is different. But to charge an
Right.
individual like that
Yeah.
kind of money, I think that's a little ridiculous. And
Yes,
to
it
me,
is.
like you just said, it talks about the heart of that person and what it is that they want to do to charge somebody for that's in the community
Mhm.
for their time is really
Right.
interesting. Especially if you don't have to travel. I understand, people want travel expenses and things like
Yeah.
that. That makes sense. But
Mhm.
to charge an excessive amount of money to an individual, I think is a little
Right.
crazy. But
To drive across town, and they work
yeah,
$5,000.
yeah, man. But definitely am honored, Dr. Dulaney, for the time you've given me today, just to be able to chat with you and learned a great deal. Hopefully, our listeners learned a lot as well, and can definitely share and replay the program. Before we wrap it up, can you leave us with your favorite quote and what it means to you, and where people can find your work?
Oh, wow. Favorite quote. Um, of course, when I was going to Central State, one of the things I was exposed to was these speeches by Malcolm X. Malcolm X's message to the grassroots. Uh, Malcolm X's Ballots of Bullets. Yeah, and and of course, one of the lines in there in the Ballots of the Bullets was that we need the religion, and we need to leave our religion at home, because if it hasn't done any more for you now than it has, you need to forget it anyway. So that was just sort of stuck with me, because our community is very, very religious, and we'll carry it with us everywhere. And I'm not anti-religion, but I do think it has sort of separated us and caused us to be at odds with each other.
Indeed. Agreed. Man, Dr. Dulaney, I hope we can do this again next year, man. We're
Okay,
glad
sure.
to have you back on the program. We didn't even dissect any of your books yet. And you got a lot
Okay.
of
My books, the one that is still out there, even though it's 20 years old, is the Black Police in America book. The other three, I've got one on the Charleston's Avery Center, one called Born to Serve. It's about the South Carolina woman's missionary Baptist, Women's Baptist Education and Missionary Association of South Carolina. And then the other one is essays on the American Civil Rights Movement.
There it is. Support Dr. Dulaney's work. Check out some of the books. I think most of your books are on Amazon, Dr. Dulaney, right?
No, only Black Police in America.
Okay.
Amazon does print on demand. Yeah. So you can all continue to buy that. And this, again, it's 20 years old. I think it was published in 1996. I'm actually working on another one. As I said, when I retired in 2016, I called myself retiring to finish a book that I've been working on and writing about African Americans in Dallas. But I messed around and took these projects, and I've been working ever since. But I'm supposed to retire again at the end of this year, and I'm going to finish that book on Dallas, and it'll be out in 2025.
We'll definitely get my copy and support. Listeners, I would recommend you do the same as well. Check out Dr. Dulaney's work. Again, Walking Black History, activist, educator, professor, has seen it all, done it all. Dr. Dulaney, appreciate the work you're doing, man. Definitely one of my heroes, man. Just being an educator and you fighting for, these kids' right to learn about Black history. And man, just putting yourself out there to do it, man. I really appreciate and admire that, man. And definitely will try to, push things forward as well.
Okay. All right.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thank you for bearing with me, since I fell asleep on you last night, but yeah, I guess I've taken this cold medicine, and I was up late doing some work Thursday. Well, I guess it was Thursday night, and so I just was dead on my feet yesterday evening, and I was at my desk, so I was tired.
Yeah, man, it was definitely worth the wait, man. I definitely enjoyed this interview. Listeners, definitely check out Dr. Dulaney's work, and of course, remember, your mind is the most powerful tool in the universe. If you can think it, you can do it. If you believe in it, you can be it. And if you fight for it, you can have it. The world is yours. This has been your host, Mr. G, and I will see you next time on MasterMine.
So every day I'm going hard. I'm talking business, bank accounts, and credit cards. And somehow we defeat the odds and making sure that no one's